This is Tim.
And this is Adam.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Adam in Nagoya. How are you doing?
I'm all right. It was one of those days where I was overwhelmed with the bureaucracy of this country, but that happens all the time, I guess.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. When I first got to Japan, I couldn't believe how many times we had to go to the city office for stuff. Like, I used to say to my then girlfriend, Japan is a communist country.
Yeah. It's like those aliens from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Like, they have so many steps for everything. Like, I'll try to abbreviate this story, but basically, you know, I do imports and exports in my day job, and so I had to get a certificate of origin to prove that these products were made in Japan. To do that, I have to first print up a request for this paper that you have to buy from them. You can only buy it from them at the Chamber of Commerce here in town. You have to buy it from them. In order to buy it, you have to print up a form that is a request to purchase it and stamp it with your company's seal. So I did that and went in there, bought their paper that I have to use, and then came back and printed it up, and then went back there to submit it with a submission form, and then these things, and then like 3 or 4 other papers that you need for nothing. They're all redundant. And after I put everything in, they said, oh, the invoice on the bill of sale, it lists this as 10 sets. But on the thing that you created, it just says 10. It doesn't specify the units. So you need to go and remake all of these. All from scratch. So,
wow.
So it was a classic Japan being pure Japan.
But, yeah, bureaucracy rules.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got a comic to talk about. It's called Theatrics. The writer is Neil Gibson. Now, Mulele and I talked about his work on critiquing comics at least twice that I could find searching our website. And he also appeared on Deconstructing Comics once 4 years ago when Coombe was reporting from London Super Comic Con, and Neil had a booth there, so Coombe talked to him somewhat there. I'm not even sure that Coombe knew that we had ever talked about Neil's stuff on the podcast, but he was there, and so Coombe talked to him. Yeah, and artist is Leonardo Gonzalez, colors by Jan Wingard, letters by Jim Campbell. Now, Neil recently successfully kickstarted the second volume of Theatrics, which was the conclusion of the story. Volume 1, I was looking around, it's available for purchase in kind of all the usual places. And I assume Volume 2 will be available there shortly. Actually, Neil said the comic was actually done before they ran the Kickstarter, and they just needed to get the funding to print it. So
okay.
Kind of quick turnaround on fulfilling the purpose of the Kickstarter. So this is a story that takes place in New York City in the 1920s. There's a famous actor whose stage name is Rudy Burns. He gets attacked in an alley and gets his face messed up, which therefore messes up his career. Mm-hmm. And an old friend, Sammy, talks him into going into boxing, but he's supposed to play a role. He play a character, kind of like pro wrestling, except nobody else knows it's a fake, including his opponent.
Yeah.
The fights themselves are real. So now, to some extent, I found parts of the story kind of predictable. Like, when Sammy says, you can never break character on this or the whole thing will get blown, you just know that at some point it's going to get blown. Somebody's going to find out. There were some other things like that where I know what's going to happen. But then there was a twist at the end that I didn't see coming, although then I felt like I probably should have, looking back at the story.
I felt the same way. Yeah, actually, I didn't see the end coming at all until probably the last couple pages. And it really surprised. Yeah, it's very rare that I'm caught off guard by a twist ending, but I don't know what I can say without spoiling it, so I just have to leave it there, I guess. But yeah,
okay, yeah, and I do think I enjoyed this more than I have Neil's previous work. Maybe partly because what we saw before was his anthology series, Twisted Dark. So it was these short stories. This one is, quite a bit longer and a little more in depth, and I think interesting. And there's just kind of a nice snap to the pacing of the story that kept me going through it.
Yeah, I felt the same way. In fact, out of the books that we've reviewed, the recent books, this is the one that I liked the most. It really just kept me going the whole way, and I read it for pleasure, not just to review it. I was enjoying it the whole time, and I agree with you. Like, I didn't read any of the shorter work, but it's got when you combine it, I think it's maybe 220 pages or something like that altogether. Yeah. But it reads quickly. I mean, I read it, in maybe in less than an hour, preparing for the talk. So it reads quickly. It, like you said, has a nice pacing, nice clip. There isn't any part where I felt it's dragging.
Yeah. I thought maybe the fight scenes went on a little bit too long, the boxing scenes, but you could just kind of flip through it at your own pace, though.
Yeah, that's what I like about that.
Punching. Okay, zoom. Let's go past that.
Yeah, I feel like that creates a nice kind of balance, because there's a few pages where there's a lot of dialogue as well, and then you get these pages where you just kind of flip through really breezily and stuff. So it creates a really nice pace and sense of time, I feel like, with that. So
yeah.
And the artwork in those fight scenes is incredible. I mean, to draw human bodies in motion, and all of these bodies are so dynamic looking, like they don't look stiff at all.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of good weight and foreshadowing and all this kind of, foreshortening and things like that make it have really, really great play on the, and the expressions, of people getting punched and wincing in pain and stuff. I think it's really, really expressive. And
yeah, there's a lot of movement in those scenes. It's not stiff at all. It's really flowing.
Yeah. The artwork in this book got better and better as it went. The first maybe 10 or 15 pages or so, I felt like I thought it might be one of those stories where it's kind of stiff, but once it gets into, especially once he's disfigured and he's got the bandages and things, like from that point on, the character design, the expressions on the face, the way that they're framed in the panels and everything like that was really, really expertly executed, I felt.
Yeah, that's true. If I look back at the beginning, it feels more like it's something the artist did 5 years before he drew the rest of the book.
Yeah, it almost does. And I thought maybe the reason for that, I don't think it's a deliberate choice, but I do feel like the first few pages are trying to set up this scene of 1920s New York. So it's a lot of these establishing kind of shots where they're focusing on creating the right look, the outfits that look like they're from the 20s and the buildings and the cars and things like that. And so I think there was a focus to try to set this scene. And then from that point on, they just kind of, because really the boxing scenes and a lot of that stuff like that, they could be set at any time. They don't have to be set in the 20s, right? So I think it's important to kind of establish that sense of time and space in the first few pages. So
yeah, I took a few notes on specific things in the art. Some of them I thought were good, and some of them I wasn't quite sure what was meant. Like in volume 1, page 10, that kind of smiling mouth panel, the way that the eye panel is placed above it, it looks evil. And I think it's supposed to be the woman, right, who is not evil. So I know that sort of threw me.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that because there's a similar scene later on where his friend gets some kind of evil ideas, and it's also shown with this smiling, kind of almost like a Cheshire grin.
Mm-hmm.
And in that same way, that in those ones, it is expressing kind of like an evil thing. So I could understand why that would be.
Yeah, I think the placement of the eye, there's an eye in a separate panel, and together with the mouth panel, it looks evil. But individually, they don't look evil, but together they do.
Yeah. It might have been just a unfortunate accident with the placement. I don't know.
Yeah. Then on page 65, at the top of that page, I thought it was kind of an odd choice. The speaker's face is obscured behind another panel. And I didn't really see, it could have been done that you could use a technique like that to be symbolic of something, but, that character is not, necessarily... I don't think she is about to reveal something in that scene that he is not going to be happy about, but I'm not sure if that covering of her face was meant to show there was deceit going on, anything like that. Do you see what I'm talking about?
I don't have it in front of me, but
okay.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's when Stephanie has come back from Europe, but she's going to reveal that she's going back.
Right.
But, yeah, and there's a panel of her hand in his hand, but that panel is covering her eyes and nose in the next panel.
I see. Yeah, I don't know if that is like an intentional choice to kind of hide her expression. I don't think so. I think it's probably an unintentional thing.
Yeah, it just felt kind of weird. Now, at the bottom of that page and onto the next page, I did like how he was running some things up to the edge of the page. I thought that was effective, including Rudy himself in the last panel. The panel itself doesn't go to the edge of the page, but he does. So, and it gives a lot of depth to it. And, off in the distance, what looks like down a long hallway, you can see her walking out the door, and him being outside of the panel kind of just adds to the distance.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's a few times where he uses that kind of technique, and I think, like I said before, as the book goes on, it becomes more and more skillful the way that that's employed. There's times where the character comes off of the panel and then fades out into kind of a white background and things like that, where so sometimes it's used just for aesthetics, but other times, like you said, it's used for storytelling, I think, and it's very effective. It's very cool.
On page 70, when he gets the letter from his mom and he's crying and tears are falling on it, the tears don't look like tears, they look like rain, because there are too many of them coming from as if he has 10 eyes or something. It took me a minute to even figure out what all those lines were. It's supposed to be tears, okay, but yeah, it doesn't quite look like that, like he's reading in the shower or something.
There are some interesting things here because the colorist and the penciler and inker are different people, and so there are some times where very expertly if you notice, the backgrounds are very, very sparse. Sometimes a lot of the panels there's no background at all, and then the colorist did a really good job of filling that space in. Like, for example, in the first few scenes where he's inside the speakeasy, there's not actually any pencil work at all. Any pen work for the backgrounds, but the colorist kind of uses colors to make it look like a crowded bar. And there's other times where the colorist does a really, really good job with light and shadow to express things. And I think
Yeah.
maybe in this scene, it would have been better if he had let the colorist handle the tears and not the penciler.
Yes. Yeah, I can see how that would have been better. But yeah, looking through it again this evening, I read it a couple days ago. I did really like Wingard's colors. I assume that this is a man, Jan, so it'd be like maybe a Dutch name.
Yeah.
But he's really good at like setting a palette for a scene, depending on the mood, and then the next scene be a different palette, and really consistent throughout that scene. Really, unites those scenes in terms of color.
Yeah.
He seems to have a lot of skill with not just doing a coloring book, but using the colors to tell the story.
Oh, for sure. I think there's a lot of very emotional color use, and then there's, like you said, ways to differentiate from one scene to the next. And I think also the colors are doing a lot of work as far as like filling out the pages. If you look at, I think at the back of the book, they have some examples of pages that are just in black and white. And it would have been a very, very different experience in that way.
Oh, yes.
So, and the thing is about this, like this era, so Prohibition America, like, and talking about the emergence of Hollywood and the end of vaudeville and all of this kind of stuff is a very common theme of like noir, and I could have easily seen this book going that direction with the kind of crime elements and the well, I guess there's not that much crime, but, and the whole premise of it being kind of a big ruse and stuff. But I'm actually kind of glad that they decided to do it all in color and not to do it in black and white.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure. One slight misstep I want to point out in terms of the writing. We've got a woman named Stephanie and we've got another woman named Sophie. And the names are too similar. I was getting confused.
And the character design... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I wasn't making enough of a distinction in the character designs either. So, yeah, they both start with S. They both got PH in the middle. That's not a good idea.
Yeah, I definitely felt a little bit confused about some of the women because that's another thing where I think they're focusing on that design. They have that very 30s look to them with their hairstyle and things like that. And it definitely made them look somewhat similar in the design. So,
yeah, I mean, I wish that he had done more with the design of that girl that they just pass on the street one time. She's blonde and she's got that kind of headpiece on, and she was really cute and memorable. They should have done more with that character, I think.
Yeah, maybe so. This is just a weird thing to say, maybe, but to me, like the name Rudy had like this very kind of Hollywood vibe, like Rudy Valentino kind of thing to me. So that seemed appropriate. But the name Stephanie didn't strike me as a very 20s name for some reason. It seems very modern.
Yeah. Yes. I don't know how many Stephanies there were.
Yeah, I have no idea.
In that era.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I know what you mean. It probably would have been a lot of women running around with names that sounded really old-fashioned to us when we were growing up, like Mabel or Ethel or that kind of thing, names that were really fashionable back then.
Right. That's what I would have guessed, yeah. I mean, that's what it would have felt natural to me, but that, who knows?
I think we do need to talk about the text that Neil adds at the end of Volume 2. Where he's talking about how, the story deals with homosexuality in some places, and, this was an era when being gay was something you desperately kept hidden.
Right.
And he wants to make sure that no one is taking offense at how gays are talked about in the story, because, it's that era when a lot of people talked about gays that way, and it was socially acceptable.
Sure.
I wasn't quite sure if he needed to put in that disclaimer. I don't know, maybe, I mean, I know some people these days get really easily offended by that kind of thing and miss the point of why it's being added to the story. It doesn't mean that the author feels that way.
Right.
But I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's something that I personally have thought about a lot, even in my own work. I wrote a book a few years ago where a guy, a bully is constantly calling this other guy a fag. And that is a word that comes up in this book as well. And I definitely didn't want to come off, when I wrote the book, I didn't want it to come off as me taking that word flippantly and thinking that, anybody can just use it. And I wanted it to be very clear that this is how bullies talk or talked at that time when I was, the time that I was trying to capture. And there's another part in the book that I wrote where a Vietnam War vet is being really racist the way he's talking, about Asian Americans and stuff like that. And I wanted those things to come off as that character's opinion and not necessarily mine. And it is you have to have a lot of trust in your audience when you do that, which I think is a sign of a mature author, obviously, is when you really trust your audience. But so in this case, I can completely understand the author's desire to do that, to kind of clear the air and say, look, this is the time that I was capturing this time and place in history. But at the same time, I feel the same way as you do. I sort of wish that he had more trust in us to kind of get that this is characters speaking from a particular time and place and not him.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, I certainly didn't need it. But, I mean, I'm not sure about the rest of his audience, but presumably a lot of them wouldn't need it. I can't speak for everybody, but...
Yeah, I think you're right, but I do think also the kind of people who would tend to make a big deal out about something like that and blow it out of proportion are the kind of people who don't have that sense. So,
and maybe don't read comics.
Yeah, that may be true as well. I always have this kind of sense like, oh, people have a sense of subtlety and irony and things like that, but I realize more and more that they don't. I think there's a lot of people who just, that flies by them when you're trying to be subtle about anything. So,
yeah.
So I don't blame him for putting that there. And, the thing is, I would, what do I want to say? It wasn't just the words that he used, but it's the fact that homosexuality and that atmosphere where you had to hide that away is an essential part of this story. Like, the story wouldn't exist without that element to it. And also the idea of exploiting that in yourself, whether or not you have those tendencies, exploiting, the homophobic culture is also a theme in this book. And so, and I think those are important issues, to be honest, I'll let the readers decide for themselves, once they have a look at this. But to be honest, the idea that to get ahead in society and to succeed, sometimes you have to make use of the culture the way that it is. You have to prey on the worst tendencies in people. I mean, I guess this is similar to people like Rush Limbaugh or Glenn Beck or people like that who people say that they don't really feel that way, but they're playing a character on TV to elicit this response. But whether they're doing that consciously or not, whether they have those ideas in their heart or not, they're consciously exploiting that in other people, which is just as bad. So that was a really interesting theme, I thought, in this book.
Yeah. But overall, I did enjoy the story quite a bit, so I definitely recommend that listeners look it up.
Yeah, I would too. So I have one thing to talk about the writing. Now, you mentioned that Coombe actually met this author,
Neil.
Neil, in London. Am I correct in assuming that he's British?
Yeah, I believe he is. I mean, his Kickstarter was denominated in pounds.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I believe if I remember that episode from 4 years ago, he did have a British accent. So
The reason that I mention that is, so there was one little tiny tip towards the beginning where he mentioned that boxing is taking off in Bristol, and the idea that Americans would know what's popular in Bristol, first of all, was something that was interesting to me, especially at that time. But
yeah, no internet.
also, he wrote Bristol, England, which, this is maybe me reading really deep into this, but the idea that he would assume Americans don't know where Bristol is, that he would have to clarify England, made it seem like the author is from the UK. But also the fact that he said England and not the UK made me feel that he's English and not Scottish or Welsh. So,
Well, Americans tend to say England when they mean the UK, though.
that's very true.
Which,
very true.
Which I think is my theory about that is that in school we learned that the United States got its independence from England, and there was no UK in 1776. And so because we know that was England, I think a lot of people, including me until maybe 30 years ago, just refer to the whole place as England.
Well,
including
yeah,
Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Oh, that's England.
It's very true. Very true. I think people are going to probably, at least people might nitpick you that I think that they actually formed the Union in 1707 or something. I could be wrong about that, but I think it was before the American Revolution. But you're right that it was at the time of the founding of the colonies, it was definitely England and not the UK. But anyway.
It reminds me of, do you ever see the British TV show, The Young Ones from the 80s?
Yeah.
Where what was the one that they started out the episode with a Dallas parody, and there's an American character who refers to somebody from Wales, England, which is clearly a poke at Americans calling the UK England.
Yeah. For sure. But well, to my point though, I mean, that's something that I agree that it's partly to do with the American education system, but I also think that English people, I don't mean British when I say that, I mean English people tend to do the same thing. They tend to call it all England. And I think that's what makes Scottish and Welsh people kind of take offense at it, is that they don't feel that England represents all of them, whereas I think a certain percentage of English people think of them as kind of the same, like interchangeable terms. So, but anyway, I also felt that there were some times where the American dialect, they were using certain words that we would never use, and it trying to make it sound like, I don't know, 1920s American culture, but it actually came off seeming a bit unnatural.
I was sort of expecting that, but I didn't notice anything in particular.
Okay.
I mean, I knew he was kind of going into a danger zone where he's British and writing American characters from 100 years ago. But yeah, there were a few points where I just thought maybe the language sounded a little too modern, but I mean, that happens with a lot of period pieces.
Sure.
But as far as UK English versus US English, I didn't really notice anything.
I didn't actually write it down, so I can't pull up any examples, but there were a couple words where they were words that I don't think Americans would typically use. I think we'd all understand it, but they were words that we wouldn't typically use. But overall, like you said, it didn't take me out of the story at all. It didn't make me feel it. I just sort of had my suspicions that the author was not from the U.S., and you confirmed those right in the beginning of the talk. So I wanted to kind of mention that. But yeah, overall, I felt the writing was really well done. The conversation was very natural. It flowed well. And what I really liked about this book, the writing in particular, is there were no exposition boxes at all. Everything was told through either the dialogue or through the characters' expressions entirely. So
yeah, that's true. Not even so much as a later.
Right,
nothing.
not one. And I love that because, comic books as a visual medium, you're supposed to show and not tell. And so he let all of it be visual. And I thought that was a really, really very masterfully done.
Yeah, and he doesn't have a character narrating the story either.
Exactly.
I mean, a lot of modern comics, when they have boxes, it'll be some character who's narrating rather than an omniscient narrator. But yeah, neither one of those happens in this book.
Yeah, and that so that is like my biggest pet peeve about like Japanese animation is they always, and this is true for movies and TV as well, they'll always have some person saying like, oh, it was in this summer that this happened, and like narrating the whole thing for movies, for everything. And it always gets under my skin. And it was just so refreshing that this didn't have anything like that. I guess refreshing is the best thing that I can say about this is that it was very refreshing. Like this story, I haven't seen it told before. It was a really fresh take. It wasn't any kind of like typical genre stuff, It was just like a very original story, very well told, and told as a comic book. It couldn't have been a novel or anything else. It was told as a comic book, and it was really well done
taking advantage of the medium. Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah. So yeah, listeners, either pick this up or wait for the movie, but because I don't know, I can imagine this might be made into a film. But then sometimes the comic is better than the movie, so.
Yeah, this one, because like I said before about the expressions of the characters and the way that it's drawn, I think it makes a better comic book than it would a film. It would be a good film, but yeah, I just this is the first book out of the ones that we've done on this show that I can fully stand behind and say I think anybody who picks it up will enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So, listeners, if you'd like us to critique your comics, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we'll read at least 30 pages. Lately, we've been in the habit of reading the whole thing, and then we'll talk about it on the show. So,
yeah, if it's good enough.
Yeah. All right. So, thanks for listening, and thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Tim.
The first chapter of Theatrics can be downloaded for free from tpub.co.uk. For the record, the Kingdom of Great Britain, made up of England and Scotland, began in 1707. That's what Adam's thinking of. The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland started in 1800 with the Act of Union. So there was indeed no United Kingdom at the time of the American Revolution. You can support this podcast and all the Deconstructing Comics shows at patreon.com/deconcomics. See the site for our goals and the rewards for supporting us. This is a bonus edition of Critiquing Comics. The queue has been long and we're trying to catch up. There will be another Critiquing Comics next Saturday. Jason will be here with me to discuss a horror comic called Midnight Highway. See you then.